pleased and honored to have today as our speaker, David Wei, who is the founding executive director of the Chinese American Museum in Washington, D.C. It's one of the newest museums in Washington, D.C. And he, along with some of our guests today, before becoming executive director, he was vice president of marketing and development for CDS. He served as communications director for the Points of Light Foundation and Volunteer Center National Network. And he served as the principal of a public relations agency, Brand Bureau, for 12 years. He has worked with and advised numerous organizations, including the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation, the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, Coastal States Organization, Washington Rebels, Quality of Life Plus, Johns Hopkins University, Fannie Mae, the National Zoo, Sprint, the Wall Street Journal, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the Department of Energy, Bon Secours, and HCA Healthcare. He was born in Queens, New York. I almost said Brooklyn. With a family originating in Xiamen, China, and the Philippines.
So thank you, May. As May mentioned, David Penny and I, we are part of a very small team heading up a new museum. And it's the first in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. So we focus on Chinese American history, culture, achievement, and the Chinese American experience. So our museum is about Chinese in America. We do delve into Chinese history and culture, but it's usually in the context of the American experience. So you might ask, what kind of people decide to launch a museum during a global pandemic? So, well, here we are. This is the team. And just to call us out, David and Penny are really an integral part of this museum, and they really are a reason for our success and for a lot of what the museum's accomplished so far. So why build a Chinese American museum? The pandemic, as you know, has made a lot of anti-Chinese hate and violence a lot more visible in the news and in our communities, on public transportation. But this is not a new thing. It's not something that's just happened in the last few years. It's something that is in part explained by 237 years of Chinese in America. So if you know something about Chinese American history, then you are a rare commodity, because it is a grossly underrepresented history. Only until recently has it been taught in our schools and our universities. I just went back to my own college town, and they did not even have Asian American studies like a lot of universities do back then. This is in the 1600s. So I drive into town, and throughout campus, they have banners celebrating Asian American History Month. And I'm just, I think we've come a long way, but they're really, most of this country, most Asian Americans, they don't really know this history. And it really does go back to the very earliest days of our country's story. So I liken our museum to a large mirror. It can be used to reflect the Chinese American story to others, and it could be something that someone of Chinese heritage can see themselves in, as they are. But this mirror shows things as they are, but also allows you to examine things that have always been there, but things you've never even seen before. So this museum is our mirror. The concept for the museum began in early 2017, and so we established the Chinese American Museum that summer, and we began to recruit a core team of academic, museum, and development experts. And by that November, we had already acquired a building downtown DC in Embassy Row, which is literally the closest museum to the University Club. It is across the street. It's right next door to the Jefferson. It's a beautiful mansion built in 1907, and we're about 9,000 square feet with 4 floors of exhibitable space. So we're about 4 blocks from the White House, as you know here, and we're just around the corner from National Geographic and a lot of other destinations. So I think we're really well positioned in the town. You'll notice that we're not in Chinatown. We did look at spaces in Chinatown, but it just, the commercial spaces there are just so hyper intensive. So it just wasn't working out. But so 9,000 square feet is a really nice, modest sized museum. But to give you a comparison, the National Museum of African American History and Culture is about 440,000 square feet. So I think you could fit about like 50 of our museums in there. So, we're a small museum, but we have a really big story to tell. And it's a great location. It's a wonderful space to tell this history. And it's an amazing opportunity to get that story across to nearly 24 million visitors to DC each year. So if we just get a little sliver of that, I think we've really made a big dent. So admission is free. When you first walk in, you're greeted by one of the mantras we like to throw around. The Chinese American story is an American story, and we present ourselves as an American history museum. And Chinese American history is an integral part of that total American story, not something that's separate or adjunct. So the first floor represents some of our first permanent displays. As we develop the rest of our permanent exhibits, floors 2 through 4 have special temporary exhibits that are typically up from 3 to 6 months at a time. So one of the first exhibits that you see when you first come into the museum is our digital photo wall. People could go to our website and they could submit personal photographs and quotes. We didn't want to hit people over the head with a lot of rote history and facts and figures. We wanted people to make this first personal connection. We want people to see the faces and stories of that are in this photo sculpture and see that, these people are a lot like me. This story reminds me of my own path. And we want to enlist that kind of connection, regardless of whether or not you're of Asian American, Asian, Chinese heritage. We want to see yourself in these stories and in photos. So here's an example of a submission. The quote is short, but you could start to see this incredible backstory that's going on here. Her older sister came to the US on a student visa alone. They joined her 3 years later. She just looks like a baby. I've always been compelled by this photo just because, it's a story like so many other immigrants to this country. But, is this Chinese American history? Is this American history? This person is not famous, at least as far as we know. But it is a story of immigrant bravery that we can all tell about either ourselves or someone else in our family line. Think about someone in your ancestry that risked it all or left everything behind to make their way in this country. So this is also from our photo wall. This is Raymond from San Francisco, California. I think he's talking, his quote is about how he is standing in front of this Chinatown store that his parents owned for 30 years. So also in our lobby is the beta version of our digital interactive timeline. It's full of like 200 data points of Chinese American history, achievement, tragedies, triumphs, pop culture. It has Crazy Rich Asians, which makes Penny very happy. But you'll notice on the screen in this photo that we put the year 1785, and that's a date that we recognize as the first recorded Chinese in America. So around this time, there were 2 highly anticipated cargo ships led by American captains that went to China and brought back imported goods to the US. And one of those ships was the Empress of China that went to New York, and that's the better known ship. But the other was the Palace that sailed into the port of Baltimore. People were really excited about these two different arrivals, and even George Washington sent representatives to purchase goods. And by the way, George Washington's plates are in this exhibit. But the captain of the Palace, John O'Donnell, he decides that he's going to retire. And he essentially strands 32 sailors on board, who are mostly from Southeast Asia. And the reason why it's the first recorded Chinese in America is that their signatures are on the pages of the Continental Congress petitioning to be sent back home. So they're unwilling participants, but we count them. So this is the exhibit that we're talking about, China from China. It's really a great milestone for us because it's a very serious collection that we've borrowed from the Dietrich American Foundation. So this is a flagship exhibit for us. And it showcases some of the original wares from these first ships to do trade with China. And again, we emphasize this exhibit because it really shows that Chinese culture was integrating into the very first movements of our country's history. And there's a tea crate that is part of this exhibit that is from the original ship. I think what's significant about this exhibit is just that these early interactions with China from American merchants were very positive. They were auspicious first introductions to Chinese culture. And they were very complex, sophisticated relationships. And it was a very positive start at the dawn of our country's history. So yeah, I hope you come by and see it because it's really incredible. All right. So the history that most people know about Chinese in America is that they worked on the railroad. So more than 15,000 Chinese worked to compete the most rugged parts of the Transcontinental Railroad. And they were not indentured or forced labor. They came from southeastern China for profitable work and fortune. They were good at the work that they did, and they were willing to do the tougher, if not seemingly impossible aspects of the projects. And the other labor forces shied away from it. But Chinese actually came first to this country in large numbers to prospect gold and other mining industries. So these are miners in Idaho Springs. It's just an incredible photo. This is an object in our collection. This is a section of rail from the original build of the Transcontinental Railroad. And it's looking for a sponsor because it needs to go into some preservation work. So the most famous photograph that was ever taken is probably around this history is the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad known as the Champagne photo. And this was the photographer Andrew Russell. And he worked for the Union Pacific. And in 1869, this is in Promontory Summit, Utah. This picture shows two train engineers holding up bottles of champagne, hence its name, and with the railroad workers lined up on either side. Can you tell what's unusual about this photo? It might be hard to see from far away, but what's significant about this photo is that there is not a single Chinese laborer in the image. 90% of the workforce was Chinese. But historical records confirm that the Chinese were there at this event, but they were not allowed to be in the photo. So this is just a great example of why we build this museum. It's history rewritten and it's history forgotten. So the late photographer Corky Lee, he recreated this photo using the descendants of Chinese railroad workers in 2011. I love this photo. It really embodies something that we're trying to do as a museum, as a community. We're reclaiming an underrepresented history. So the success of Chinese labor also made it a target of other labor groups at the time. So a highly politicized anti-Chinese campaign, not dissimilar to ones you've seen more recently, led to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. If I were to create a short list of things that I would like people to remember when they come to the museum, this will be one of them. But this act is the first and remains the only law to have been implemented to prevent all members of a specific ethnic or national group from immigrating to the US. It was rescinded in 1943, and this is the Magnuson Act. But it was a gesture because the US desperately wanted to secure China as an ally in World War II in the Pacific. So the reason why I say gesture is that it allowed only for 105 Chinese to come into the country per year. That's 105, not 105,000, 105. And at the time, the population in 1943 was 137 million. So it was not until the Immigration and Nationality Act and Civil Rights Acts in 1965 that they started to open immigration proportionally. And so that's 81 years after the Chinese Exclusion Act. So many people don't realize that Chinese have fought in every conflict and served in the US military since the Civil War. So 50 or more soldiers fought in the Civil War. It's hard to believe. And 20,000 fought in World War II. At the time, thanks to the Exclusion Act, that comprised 25% of the Chinese male population. 40% of those men were not even allowed citizenship when they enlisted. So one of the permanent exhibits that we're developing right now, David and I are both pretty knee-deep in this, is called Service to Country, which presents Chinese Americans not just in military service, but also political, diplomatic, uniformed service. And we just want to show in many ways the contributions that Chinese have made to this country. So this is good news. A little late, but in 2018, Congress enacted the Congressional Gold Medal for Chinese American World War II veterans. The Chinese American Museum and other community organizations were involved in making this happen, and our Service to Country exhibit will feature one of these medals. So another key section of the museum's permanent exhibits will include a section on the ongoing fight for civil rights, anti-Asian hate and violence, and the communities that are working to make a difference. So as a museum, we're not an advocacy organization, but we do feel that telling the Chinese American story and making it available to as many people as possible is a powerful tool for advocacy. So this is from a special temporary retrospective exhibit of a Washingtonian artist named Dora Fu Lee. Her work is in the Smithsonian, at the National Portrait Gallery, and a number of institutions, but you'll be hard pressed to find information about her. It's just an example of where we're trying to really shine a light on Chinese Americans and their contributions. So another recent, this is a sculpture of hers. There was also a recent exhibit on Chinese opera and its importance and impact on 19th and 20th century America. So we're also pleased to say that school groups have started to come back this year, and we've been ramping up student groups. Between October of 2019 and March 2020, we really had a lot of school groups come by, but of course the pandemic really took hold, and so we went virtual during the height of the pandemic. So what I like about this picture is just that it really just shows the diverse crowds that we're bringing. So a considerable amount of our museum is dedicated to 20th century and contemporary Chinese Americans. So future installations include a variety of Chinese American contemporaries. This is a campaign button from the 1964 Republican National Convention. This is Hiram Fong, who became the first Asian American to receive delegate votes for his party's nomination for president of the United States. This is astronaut Taylor Wong. This is actress Anna Mae Wong. So earlier in the pandemic, we had a live telecast. This is as as we were going to more virtual, we did this live telecast with the TV chef Martin Yen, and he did a Thanksgiving style, Chinese style Thanksgiving. So, one of the things that COVID has taught us is that, these online events, especially hybrid events, they can reach thousands of people. And we've had some online programs with 4,000 registrants. So, a museum our size, we'd be hard pressed. The Smithsonian would be hard pressed to have a live event, with that many people. So, it's sort of a new age for museums. This is the nuclear physicist Chen Wu. This, we want to really highlight great Americans that you may not know. Okay, so this is the hallway to our first floor theater. And on the left is a mural of the Chinese laborers on the Oregon Railroad. And in this theater, we like to show a number of short films. Right now, we're looping a 20-minute film about the railroad. But I just got this edit of a 3-minute rough cut from our video editor, and I want you guys to be one of the first people to see it. So let's see how this goes.
Since the earliest days of our country's history, Chinese in America have made great sacrifices, overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, and played a critical role in our country's success. The Chinese American story presents a rich tapestry of hope, fortitude, and a devotion to the American spirit. Chinese Americans have played an important role throughout our history, but you can't always find Chinese Americans in history books. It remains drastically underrepresented and misunderstood, perhaps unknown to many. Now, more than ever, it's time to explore the past and present and celebrate the promise of the future. By casting a brighter, more focused light on Chinese Americans, we can open our eyes to the achievements and contributions of all. Chinese Americans are an integral part of the fabric of our nation. From recent immigrants full of hope for a better life in a new country, to fifth-generation families with a long-established legacy, the Chinese American story reveals itself as the American story. 5 million Americans as diverse and unique as the country in which they live. We are the innovators and explorers, the urbanites and the farmers. We are the artists and the entrepreneurs, small business owners and titans of industry, pioneers, poets, athletes, and the front lines. We serve, we dream, we laugh, and we stand up for what is right, and we must continue to tell this American story. Together, we are developing the first and only museum in our nation's capital dedicated to the Chinese American story. In just a few years, the Chinese American Museum DC has risen in downtown Washington, D.C. At the heart of this project are people across an incredible community of volunteers, advisors, supporters, experts, and people like you. Thank you for making this possible.
We hold up the mirror to see history. We hold up the mirror to see ourselves. It's my hope that someone that visits the museum, regardless of their heritage or their origin, that they see themselves in the mirror and they think, this is what an American looks like.
I just want to end with our usual ending. We plant a tree in the honor of each of our speakers. It's something we do in partnership with the National Park Service. We started with cherry blossom trees around the tidal basin, which we still do. So yours might be a cherry blossom tree, or it might be a native tree that goes into one of our downtown parks. We're retreeing the downtown parks. Okay.